The WAV file was labeled simply MXD221, tucked into a manila folder behind a stack of unpaid property taxes in my grandfather's burnt-out office. He'd been gone 5 years, and the insurance company had finally coughed up the rest of his belongings from the hardware store fire. A few filing cabinets, a bent cash register, and a cardboard box that smelled like gasoline and wet ash. I'd driven 3 hours to settle the estate, and the only reason I even opened the folder was because my name was on a sticky note in his jagged handwriting. For Charlie when he's old enough. I'm 32. I guess I'm old enough. The file contained a single business card for a recording studio in Burlington, Marrow Sound, Inc., and the data disc. No letter, no explanation. My grandfather, Raymond Voss, was a man of unspoken words and measured weather reports. He was the kind of guy who fixed his own tractor and could identify every bird in the county by its call. He wasn't a prankster. That's what I kept telling myself as I popped the disc into my laptop in the kitchen of his empty farmhouse that evening. A cold wind rattling the windows like a visitor trying to get in. The file player loaded a 41-minute recording. The waveform on screen was flat, hauntingly silent for the first stretch, and I almost clicked it off before the audio finally crackled to life. What I heard next didn't make sense. It still doesn't make sense. You have to understand, this wasn't a ghost story recording. There was no static-drenched whisper, no spooky reverse message Bible verse. It started with a man's voice, clear as glass, calmly introducing himself as Dr. Elias Marsh, an acoustic ecologist. He said he was cataloging sound signatures of abandoned buildings across Vermont, old mills, schoolhouses, barns. He'd been given a tip about a condemned grain silo on Route 104, a cylinder of rusted metal that had stood alone in a cow pasture for 50 years. He set up his gear on a Tuesday. The weather was clear. The recording, he said, was merely a test run, a baseline of ambient noise. For the next 10 minutes, that's all I heard, whined over grass, a distant crow. The creak of the silo's rivets expanding in the sun. It was boring, meditative even. I made myself a cup of tea, my grandfather's old kettle whistling a note that briefly harmonized with the recording's breeze, and I leaned back in his worn recliner, feeling the ghost of him in the room. Then the silo began to hum. It wasn't a mechanical groan. It was a single, pure frequency, a low A, somewhere around 110 hertz, that rose up out of the wind like a singer clearing their throat in an empty cathedral. Dr. Marsh, on the tape, audibly shifts. You can hear the rustle of his jacket, the click of a transport. Interesting, he mutters to himself. Resonance, let's see if we can isolate it. He walked around the silo, tapping the metal sheets with a knuckle, and the hum followed him. It was harmonic, it responded. Every tap echoed back a note a half-step higher. I sat up straighter. There was something in the cadence of the tapping. It wasn't random. It was calling back and forth, a question, an answer. I listened for another 5 minutes as Dr. Marsh recorded the silo's song. He narrated his observations in that calm, academic voice, pointing out that the fundamental frequency was too low to produce naturally from the metal's thickness and age. He mentioned that the hum seemed to be diatonic, moving in musical intervals. He said, "It appears to be singing in a key." That was the last normal thing he said. A new sound joined the recording, a click, not a tap on metal, a dry, organic click like a knuckle cracking, then another, and another. They came from inside the silo, echoing off the curved walls. Dr. Marsh's microphone picked up his sharp intake of breath. Hello?" he called out, and his voice wobbled. Is someone in there? Silence, then the clicks formed a rhythm, slow at first, then faster, like a dozen hands snapping in unison. The low hum dropped beneath it, and for the first time I felt the hair stand up on the back of my neck. The sound that came out of my laptop speakers wasn't coming from a metal structure. It was coming from a throat, a voice. It didn't speak English. It didn't speak any language I could recognize. It was low and wet like mud boiling, and it formed consonants that sounded like rocks grinding together. 3 syllables rising in pitch at the end. A question, a greeting. My teacup trembled in my hand, and I realized I was gripping it so hard my knuckles had gone white. Dr. Marsh screamed. The microphone thumped against his chest, and the sound of shuffling feet filled the recording. He was running. You could hear him tearing through the tall grass, his breath ragged, the field equipment clanking at his belt. The hum didn't fade. It grew louder even as he moved away, and the liquid voice followed him, wrapping around the recording like vines around a trellis. The last sound was a car door slamming, the engine turning over. The recording cut to silence. I sat there in my grandfather's farmhouse, the silence of my own room ringing in my ears, and I played the last 30 seconds again. The voice was still there, buried under the engine noise. It was still forming those 3 syllables. And the strangest thing, the most impossible thing, was that on the second listen I understood it. Who opens the door? I closed the file player. My hands were shaking, and I couldn't tell if it was fear or the cold draft slithering through the crack beneath the kitchen door. I did what anyone would do. I told myself it was a hoax, some radio play, a prank by my grandfather's old buddies. But the card in the folder bothered me. So did the file's metadata, which I checked with trembling fingers. The date stamp on the recording read, October 3rd, 1987, 37 years ago. The next day, I drove to Burlington. The weather was thin and gray, a December sky the color of a dirty bandage, and the address on the card led me to a parking lot where a Taco Bell stood where Marrow Sound, Inc. should have been. The kid behind the counter, wiping down a tray, had never heard of the studio. His manager, a tired woman with a gold tooth, said the building had been demolished in 1999 after a fire. When I asked her if she knew anything about a Dr. Elias Marsh, she gave me a look that made me stop asking. But I didn't stop there. That's the problem with hooks like this. They sink into your skin. I spent the next 3 weeks online, digging through old newspaper archives, university records, and county registries. Elias Marsh existed. He was a lecturer at Johnson State College until 1988, when he submitted a letter of resignation citing personal reasons. His wife filed for divorce a year later. His notice of death, a boilerplate legal document, listed cause of death as accidental drowning in Lake Champlain 2 years after the recording. A kayak was found overturned. The body was never recovered. I found his name in a single other place. An entry in the archive logs of the Vermont Center for Sound Research, dated November 1987. He had bequeathed them a collection of field recordings, ambient signage of rural decay, and a note requesting that one specific tape marked MXD 221 be sealed for 30 years. It had been sealed for 30 years. I was the one who broke it. I didn't tell anyone what I'd heard. I couldn't. The words were stuck in my chest like a fishbone because the 3 syllables that Dr. Marsh recorded, that liquid, grinding phrase, had started to appear everywhere I went, not in audio. In the physical world, it started small, a pattern in the grain of my kitchen table that looked like an angular glyph, a smear on my bathroom mirror that seemed on closer inspection to have been drawn from inside the glass. I'd scrub it away and it would return the next morning, still fresh, still wet. But the worst was the sound. I woke up on the 4th night to a hum. Low, pure, vibrating through the floorboards of my apartment, shaking the copper pipes in the walls. I sat up in bed, my heart thumping, and realized the hum was calling to me. It was the same a note from the recording. And as I listened, holding my breath in the darkness, I heard the clicks, coming from my closet, knuckles cracking in rhythm. I didn't open the closet door. I stayed frozen for 6 hours until the first gray light of dawn bled through the blinds and the sounds faded like frost giving way to sun. I called my mother, the only person who might know something. Her voice was thin and distant, the way it always is when she's on her porch in Florida watching the waves. I asked her about the tape, about Marrow Sound, about Grandpa Ray's sticky note. She was quiet for a long time, and I heard the creak of her rocking chair stop. "Ray never had an office fire, Charlie," she said finally. "He had a heart attack out in the East Field. We couldn't get the tractor to him. We had to hike half a mile with the medical kit." A pause. "What do you mean, burped out office?" The line went cold, and I realized she wasn't talking to me anymore. She was talking to something else in the room with her. I heard a low hum, the same damn hum, coming from her end of the line, then a click, a knuckle. Her voice came back, tinny and strange. "Can you hear that, Charlie? It keeps asking me who opens the door." I dropped the phone. Let me tell you what I know now as I write this. I know that Dr. Elias Marsh spent the last months of his life in a psychiatric ward in southern Vermont, babbling to nurses about a silo that wasn't a silo. I know that my grandfather visited him there 3 times. Visitor logs, dated 1988, found in a sealed library archive. I know that on the night of my grandfather's heart attack, the ground beneath his tractor field was found to have deep, cylindrical impressions in it, as if something incredibly heavy had stood there for a long, long time. But the main thing I know, the main thing I can't escape, is that the recording doesn't play anymore. My laptop died 2 days ago, and when I plugged it in, the file was gone. MXD221 vanished from the folder, leaving only a single paragraph of computer code that my IT friend translated for me. It timed to be a location. GPS coordinates. They point to a field a mile behind my grandfather's farmhouse. The field where the grain silo used to stand, the one I remembered from my childhood as rusted and hollow and filled with swallows. I drove out there this morning. The silo is still there, thank God. But the field around it is covered in frost, even though it's 70 degrees out and there's a sound coming from inside the metal cylinder. Not wind, not birds. It is a low, wet voice pressing against the curved walls from within, and it's not speaking English. But I understand it now. I understand it fully. Who opens the door? Who opens the door? Who opens the door? I'm sitting in my car in the driveway as I type this, and I'm not going to answer it. I'm going to drive away back to the city, and I'm going to get a new phone, new laptop, new apartment, and a new name. But as I go to turn the key in the ignition, I notice something that makes my blood run cold. My reflection in the rearview mirror is smiling at me, and my mouth is moving. I'm mouthing the words, "I do."